Can't help but swing it, boy. Swing it, brother, swing.
Artistically, I think that the artist must approach Scripture to discover, not to impose a worldview, but to discover a worldview and to create what Frank Gabeline called in his wonderful book, The Christian, the Arts, and Truth, a kind of a grid or a mesh through which we can filter everything that the world throws at us and say, okay, this that I'm receiving from the world corresponds to big T truth. This and what God says match up, because the world can stumble upon truth too. And I can get that truth from a world context, and I can redeem it to the glory of God. An example would be, let's say, the conversion of St. Paul on the road to Damascus by Caravaggio, a great Baroque painter. Well, Caravaggio was pretty much a drunken reprobate to the day he died, but he was a great painter, and he was a man of aesthetic integrity, so that when he encountered an image or a theme that said to him, this is truth, he wasn't always right, but occasionally he was, he had the ability, the aesthetic technique, and the integrity to translate that truth to the canvas in a way that revealed the truth for what it was and not what he thought it should be. And as artists and theologians, that's part of our job, to receive from the world the data and then discern within the maelstrom what is truth, and see it sort of like looking at a star field, sort of like looking at the Milky Way, and to the uneducated eye, or perhaps the unimaginative eye, it's just a star cluster. There's nothing special about it. But what we can do as we study that star field is to see embedded within it certain stars that form a constellation. And by connecting the dots, we can see a picture in the stars. And that's kind of the way it is in discerning truth amidst all of the data that comes, that the world flushes our way. We can discern truth and see a picture that corresponds to the picture that God gives us in Scripture, and that picture can reinforce our theology that God is indeed the architect of all truth, or the source of all truth, and that by embracing that we can undergird our conviction in the reliability of and the beauty of Scripture, and receive from Him truth that is embedded there, that we see reflected in the world at large.
I'm reminded of, you had me read Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces when I was studying with you, and it makes me think of that, of how this story structure, that if you look at it, is the undergirding of really God's story, the story that we see in the Bible, and the story of Jesus and bringing good to the earth, and how there are glimpses of that in really all of literature, whether it's, quote, Christian author or non-Christian author.
Yeah, even a man like Campbell, here is another kind of a Caravaggio figure, although he wouldn't be as, he certainly wouldn't be out there on the moral fringe like Caravaggio was, but Campbell, Freudian, Buddhist in his leanings, Campbell was able to discern what he called, and I think he was really working sort of in a kind of a mind meld with Northrop Frye, who wrote Anatomy of Criticism, when they both discerned these archetypes of the ideal and the unideal experience as they applied to a basic narrative structure that Campbell called the monomyth, the great monomyth, a kind of a meta-narrative. And within that structure, we see four basic elements. One, the ideal, and then the antithesis of that is the unideal, both of which are static elements, and the movement from the ideal, the Garden of Eden, to the unideal, Genesis 3:15, when there is no hope in the world, and ultimately to, if you take the ideal as heaven and the unideal as hell, man without God, the trip is the story. The journey is the story, from the ideal to the unideal. Or, and that's a tragedy, or from the unideal to the ideal, which is
a revelation.
Comedy. Yeah, back to the garden.
Yeah.
We're going back to the garden. So this monomythic cycle, Campbell noted, was in all literature from every literate culture, and that at least 3 of those 4 elements would constitute a story, because you have to have a beginning, middle, and end to any story. So I think that even a man like Campbell, who was certain far from Christian faith, or a man like Caravaggio can both discern structures, archetypes that are in the Bible, and they are in all great literature.
Don't stop to diddle daddle. Stop